He is the fourth president of Fuller Theological Seminary. He upholds Calvinistic Reformed Christianity and actively promotes interfaith dialogues between Protestants, Catholics, and Mormons. He witnessed the ups and downs of the 20th century global mission movement. He also actively engages in thinking and speaking about church-state relations, church and society, Christ and culture, social equality, and religious freedom. He is a renowned scholar in Christian philosophy, ethics, and public life. He wrote over 20 books and has been a promoter of interfaith dialogues.
I'm a Christian, that I'm an evangelical Christian, and that I am a Reformed Christian. And it's really Reformed theology that has most shaped the way I think about God and God's relationship to the world. I've spent a lot of time playing around in my thought between commonness, what we share as human beings as such, but also the difference that the gospel makes in our understanding of the big issues of life.
He responds to this changing time by writing.
But as I got into my own work as a philosopher and ethicist, I became very interested in what it is that human beings have in common. What is our shared human nature, that we have whatever our ethnicity, our nationality, gender, race, but also in the area of thought. Can we look to people who are not Christians and expect to learn from them? And so for me, the teaching of Abraham Kuyper, the doctrine of common grace, as well as understanding the opposition, the antithesis.
Richard Mouw had worked at Calvin College as a professor of Christian philosophy for 7 years. He was also a visiting professor at the Free University of Amsterdam. After that, he was professor of Christian philosophy and ethics at Fuller. Later, he served as the president of Fuller Seminary for 20 years until his retirement in 2013. Who has influenced this president of Fuller Seminary and a top scholar in Christian ethics?
When I was working on my PhD at the University of Chicago, and I was there in residence for 3 years, those were very formative years for me, because I was struggling with how does a Christian relate to the political system. This was a time of significant political protest against the war in Vietnam and the civil rights movement. How do we relate to the intellectual culture of a secular university? And I began reading a magazine that eventually, when I moved to Grand Rapids, I became one of the editors of, but the Reformed Journal. And it was people like Lewis Smedes and a number of others who were related to Calvin College and Calvin Seminary, who really influenced my thinking. And it was through them that I became very committed to the thought of Abraham Kuyper. But when I was in my final year of graduate study, Alvin Plantinga came to the University of Chicago as a guest professor. I took his seminar in the philosophy of religion, and at the end of the seminar, he asked me to go to coffee with him. And as we were walking over to the coffee shop at the university, he said to me, "Are you a Calvinist?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, then I think you ought to think about coming to Calvin College." And really coming to Calvin College was the great influence in my life. Alvin Plantinga, Nicholas Waltersdorf, Lewis Smedes, George Marsden, so many others who had a profound impact on the way in which I think about things. And when I went off in 1985, after 17 years here at Calvin College, I saw myself as taking what I learned at Calvin College and bringing it to a broader evangelical community. I'm very grateful to God for the influence of the people at Calvin College and Calvin Seminary, for the ways in which they had a profound impact on me. I don't know where I would be if I had not had those influences. I was very disillusioned at the time with evangelical Christianity because it was a very private religion, rightly emphasizing very personal things, but not really thinking much about the larger world and the problems of the world, poverty, racism, the military issues and the like. And it was just a profound thing for me to actually meet real people, not just writings, but real people who nurtured me and argued with me and pushed me to think more clearly about things. And I don't know where I would be without that. God knows, but I don't know. When I taught in the philosophy department at Calvin College for 17 years, every Tuesday afternoon we meet for a couple of hours. And if we were writing on something, we would have people read it ahead of time and we would critique each other. And we had a lot of good arguments. It wasn't just friendly. It was tough intellectual challenges that we had. But what was wonderful too is that people wanted to talk to each other, and not just about their narrow specialties, but about the big issues of what is Christian philosophy? How do we relate faith and science? How do we think about the larger patterns of culture, film and theater and the arts and business life and higher education in general? And there was just an eagerness to talk together about those things. And the academic life has its lonely moments as well. I'm trying to write a book right now, and I sit for a couple hours staring at my laptop screen, trying to figure out how to write the opening paragraph. I mean, that's lonely work, and there's no way of getting around that. But it's wonderful to have people who support you in that, that you know that they pray for you in that. But there's a loneliness in the academic life that ought not to be, and that is the loneliness of trying to please God and not have anyone to talk to, not have any kind of support system. And so even for scholars at non-Christian colleges and universities, I think it's important that there be networks of Christian scholars who periodically get together and exchange ideas, argue with each other, because I think arguing, it's iron sharpening iron. I think arguing with each other is very important. So one of the great joys of my life has been experiencing academic community in a Christian context. And I wish that for the many Christian scholars that I know in China, many of whom have come to a faith in Christ, and they're very lonely in different places, and we can't do things for them. But it's so important for us to encourage the formation of networks of scholars and even have international discussions where we can talk about what it means to be a philosopher or a chemist or a sociologist or an economist in different contexts, different cultural contexts, different national settings. Well, there are many needs of our time, and some of them I think Christian academics can address. I think one is, how do we talk with people with whom we disagree in other settings, such as in China? How do we talk to persons who are of the Confucian way of life? How do we talk to Buddhists? How do we talk to Muslims? People of the folk religions, and these are very important. How do we think about Christian citizenship? Not just this or that specific challenge, but how do we understand who we are as followers of Jesus Christ in a specific national context? What does it mean to be a citizen in California in the United States? What does it mean to be a Christian citizen in Nanjing or in Harbin? And how do we relate to governments that not only are led by people who don't believe, but often are led by people who don't want us to believe as well. So how do we wrestle with those questions? Because the Bible takes government very important, but it also takes obedience to Jesus Christ very important. And we have a lot of conversations that we need to be having about that. And I've learned so much from my friends in other national and cultural contexts on those things. And then I think some of the important issues in our culture of, we used to talk a lot about faith and science. Then we realized that you couldn't talk about faith and science without also talking about faith and technology. Well, today we need to talk about faith and the social media. You know, there are thousands and thousands of young people in China who are doing Warcraft right now, that is online gaming. And they're networked with people in Belgium and in North Dakota and Seoul, South Korea. And there are new international communities that are emerging through social media, through gaming. And the church has really not done much for that, and really doesn't always know how to do it. But we need scholars who are studying that. What are the good things about making friends? If you're Chinese in Nanjing, making a friend in Brussels, in Belgium. But what are the dangers of that as well? A fantasy world, a world without real human flesh and blood people that you're trusting in. We have so many issues today that we need to be thinking about, and often the academic disciplines don't give us the right kind of boundaries for that, and we need to find each other in new ways. I have two grandsons, one of them a student now at Calvin College, another one still a student in a public high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. In their high school years, they have had Muslim friends. I never knew a Muslim as a child. We prayed for missionaries to Arabia, and we sometimes saw slides when they came back on furlough, and they would show pictures of people with camels and with head coverings and the like, but I didn't know Muslims. Today there are Muslims who live in my neighborhood, and we don't always know how to talk to each other. And furthermore, if all we do is watch the news on television, we think of Muslims, of Islam, as very evil people who are trying to destroy us. But I know a 30-year-old Muslim mother with two children, who one is 8 years old, one is 6 years old. And she worries about their going to school because they get bullied on the playground. That's a kind of interfaith conversation. Mothers need to be talking to mothers, and fathers and mothers talking to other parents, and neighbors need to talk to each other. But very often it's difficult to know how to do that, and I believe that the Christian community has to provide that. And so there's a learning that takes place in interfaith dialogue. There's the opportunity always that we look for to point people to Jesus Christ, but promoting a neighborliness and mutual understanding and seeing each other as real human beings who are created by God. These are, I think, very important challenges for us today. It's so important for us to be talking to people of other faiths, and it's so important for us as Christian academics, Christian intellectuals, Christian church leaders, to be modeling how to do that. I wrote a book several years ago on civility, and I got the idea for writing a popular book on civility from a wonderful line that I read in a book by Dr. Martin Marty, the great Lutheran theologian from the University of Chicago, who said, a lot of people today who are civil don't have very strong convictions, and a lot of people who have strong convictions aren't very civil. We need to have convicted civility. And I think the Bible teaches that. In 1 Peter chapter 3, it says, we should always be ready to give to anyone who asks of you a reason for the hope that lies within you. You know, that's conviction. But then it goes on to say, but do so with gentleness and respect. And so how do we engage in public life in a respectful relationship, and even finding patterns of cooperation with people about whom we disagree on the basic issues of life, but at the same time maintain our strong convictions, and always be ready when asked, when given the opportunity to speak about our faith. But sometimes we simply need to act out our faith alongside of people with whom we disagree. And this is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge for the church in China these days, because there still are wonderful opportunities to worship in China and to work for the public good. During the earthquake of several years ago, the Christian community was wonderful. And I've talked to government officials in China saying how impressed they were that Christians were immediately acting to come to the relief of people who had been victimized by the earthquake. That's a good thing. That's a real witness for Christ. And we need to be showing who we are by our good works in public life as a way of living out our convictions and not denying our convictions.